Okay, we are live on 3 platforms. Welcome, Mr. David Smith over there on the end. Say hello, David.
Oh, hello everybody. How's it going? Tom, how are you?
I am doing excellent. It is another Tuesday, and we have a special guest right here, Michael King. Welcome. This is your first session with us, isn't it?
I'm honored to be here, Tom, with you. And I want to say happy belated birthday. I missed it
Ah,
on LinkedIn, but I'm going to get it right here. First one to tell you live, happy birthday.
Thank you, sir. I am one. It is birthday plus one, and what I'm going to do every day, I'm going to say birthday plus two, birthday plus three. I'm just going to keep it up, see how long I can go.
and so once you get halfway, you have to do birthday like minus so and so it becomes a countdown to the next birthday.
Oh, that's not a bad idea.
There you go. See, I'm
Yeah,
worth something.
yeah, you're worth something. Well, gentlemen, we are talking about qualified persons today, and Michael, since you are, I believe probably everybody knows David. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we just do a we'll do each of you, each of us, or each of you, just David, you do a little introduction of yourself. Does that sound like a plan?
Sure, absolutely. So, if anyone
Right.
does not know, I'm David Smith. I'm the Codes and Standards Specialist for Eaton, and so a large part of what I do is essentially represent Eaton the electrical industry whenever it comes to state adoption meetings. And so I travel state to state to represent the electrical industry to make sure that lawmakers are making the best decisions and most informed decisions whenever it comes to electrical safety.
Awesome. Thank you. And Mr. King, Michael King, how about you're next up, buddy?
Oh, all right. Well, I'm the lead technical and safety training specialist. What a title. Here in the services group. So, my responsibilities, and I've been in this role for about 8, 9 years now, is to really ensure that not only our own employees within Eaton, the service group, get the adequate training that they need, but ultimately that all of our customers. So, a lot of you on this call today, I can provide you with that training to ensure that you actually maybe meet the requirements of this topic I think we're going to discuss here in detail is this qualified worker. What is a qualified worker? How do you accomplish that? So that's really my primary role. I get to travel around the country and meet lots of different people in different industries and talk electrical safety, but also equipment operation and maintenance and all how it all ties together ultimately.
You are the man. And I guess this whole COVID situation put you in, as well as all of us, in a little bit of a crunch because, I mean, how do you do? Have you done a lot more, online training like this, or how do you handle? I mean, how are you do? How are you existing?
Yeah, it was a shocker. I'll remember when COVID hit. Really, you and I were together in
Right.
Reno, Nevada, actually, right, at
That's
a
right.
conference, and flew home not knowing what the future held, and ultimately. Met with a lot of customers over the phone talking about upcoming trainings, and at first it was, let's postpone the training, and we postponed it for a week, then a month, then 3 months, and it just kept on going, right? So ultimately, I worked with a absolutely fantastic team that completely switched what we were doing and went out, purchased cameras, purchased green screens, and all of us have, in essence, recording studios in our homes, in our basements, right? And also kind of sneaking into the buildings like I did today. That I'm actually back in the building in the office in the Power Systems Experience Center in
Oh, okay.
Pittsburgh. Yeah, that's the background behind me. So I snuck
Awesome.
in, but we've been filming lots of training for an e-learning format, but also we're doing a lot of remote instruction via WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all the platforms out there. Try to do as much training as possible because ultimately, at first, everybody kind of took a break from it, and now we're playing a lot of catch up, right? And the manufacturing facilities kept going. Construction has kept up, new facilities being built, right? So there's a lot of need ultimately for training today, and we're doing what we can to meet those requirements. And I really hope that one of these days we can all be here in Pittsburgh in the Power Systems Experience Center, or maybe down in Houston in the
Hmm.
Experience Center there, and we can be in person doing training again.
Yeah, that is I think that's an important aspect. There's a lot to be said about what we're doing online, and David knows this from the code adoption world and trying to watch what's going on remotely. And there's certain things you can do online, but getting your hands on equipment is critical, in my opinion. I don't know. It plays an important role. The in-person aspect of it and physical aspect of education, an important role.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I just to speak on that very quickly, me being the house cat that I am, right? I would imagine that anybody who's actually going through these particular trainings that, is going to do this in person, it is much more helpful to, like, you're not going to do the work in remotely, right? This
Right.
is not remote work that you're going to be training for. And so it is helpful to actually have your hands on the actual equipment, that once the time comes, whenever you're actually doing the installation, it is not the first time or the second time or the third time that you are making some type of contact and you have some type of familiarity with the equipment, so you get everything exactly right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and I got a great analogy. I know Tom is a little bit of a musician himself. I used to play in a band, and I decided to take up a new instrument, tried to learn guitar, right? And read the books, watched videos online, picked up the guitar, and for a month straight hated it.
Oh
It was
man.
terrible. It was terrible. My fingers hurt. I couldn't do it right. There are some aspects of our jobs, of our personal lives, that you just can't do over a computer, over by reading a book. You can't accomplish those goals. So it all fits together in the bigger picture.
Absolutely. So the qualified person, though. So our path to success this evening is the first topic up for discussion is going to be around the requirements, right? So we have to understand what is, and I know there's probably, I know some of the definitions are kind of vague. So what I'd love to do is talk a little bit about where do we get the definition. I mean, I know that we have various documents. We have 70E, 70B, 70. We got OSHA. So where do we hone in on? Do we want to look at some of those definitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, Tom, uh, um, when we talk about a qualified worker, the intended goal is the same, right? We want to make sure that the employees doing work on electrical systems have the skills, have the knowledge to be able to do it in a safe and correct manner, ultimately, right? So I think, you know, we've been working on those definitions for many, many years. I think we'll continue to probably hone them and change them. But I think you see lots of organizations, such as you just put up, NFPA 70E. They have their definition of what they feel is best, and this is not just a committee speaking. This is a consensus standard, right?
Oh
This
yeah.
is actually created by public input. So the public has made this definition up, and I think it's an interesting one. It talks about demonstrating skills. I think that's awesome. I think it really hones in on the construction and the operation of the equipment. But then I think it also leaves a little to be desired potentially, right? With what is safety training to identify hazards? What does that look like? What does that mean ultimately?
Yeah, Michael, think about what we've got going on right now. We are international. We've got Felix Sandoval out of Colombia, not South Carolina, buddy. Okay, we got Felix Sandoval. We got Ryan Jackson in the house. We got Joe Bellantoni, and Chris Fink just mentioned through our LinkedIn connection. It needs to be demonstrated and not just book training. I think, and I think this definition speaks to that: demonstrated skills and knowledge related to the construction and operation of electrical equipment and installations, and has received safety training. So you got two aspects here. You got the equipment training and you have safety training. How are they different?
Um, I think they are in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't think you can completely separate out safety from the equipment or the technical side 100%. The same as you can't separate out the equipment from safety, right? They go together ultimately, but they're both equally important in my mind. Go back to my guitar, analogy there, right?
Hmm.
I can demonstrate the skills on knowing chords of a song. That doesn't mean I can actually play that song though, and make it recognizable for you.
Yeah, it took me a while for when I was playing. My wife would be like, and I'd go, that was Leonard Skinner," and they'd go, she'd say, "Well, I didn't get that." So yeah, but at least now it resembles it at this point. But Joe Bellantoni pointed out that this is I think I have 70. The National Electrical Code has the exact same definition, and they even reference you to 70E.
Mhm. Absolutely. And can I jump back actually 1 second, Tom?
Yeah.
Can we go back to 70E? Because as I was kind of opening up the standards, and I'm kind of surrounded by standards here. It's how I live. But ultimately, I was looking in the book as I see you're picking your book up, and I realized, and I've never really paid attention to this, that you know under training requirements, that's where
What
there's
section?
actually that is section 110.6. Did this off
10.6.
the cuff. I apologize.
No, you're good. Yep, that's training.
110 110.6 is training
Class,
requirements.
everyone in class, please turn to page 110.6.
Yeah.
Not the
70E,
page. Yeah.
that's 17. You got it,
There you
David.
go.
On that page, A1 is actually qualified person. And there's a whole list of what training a qualified person actually requires.
Yeah.
So there are some details behind what skills and knowledge you have to be qualified. And it's not actually found in the definition of a qualified person. It's found in another section, a section for training.
Yeah. And you know what I noticed too, and we talked about this earlier. We haven't brought up OSHA yet, but OSHA also has, and if you look at, and you put some links and you sent this to me, 1910.331. So there's a difference between 1910 and 1926, which we can get to, but in 1910.331, there is what a qualified person is. But to your point about the training, 1910.332 talks about the training. And if you read down through in 1910, it goes through, it tells you what the content needs to be. And I've not done a comparison between 70E and 1910, but I think from what I've heard, 70E is a little bit more complete when it comes to electrical safety training than the OSHA requirements are. But OSHA has their laws, so OSHA is the shall, and 70E is the how, right? So
Absolutely. And I will go a little farther and say sometimes 70E could be the law, could be the shall, right? Because of how different municipalities, states, local municipalities, OSHA, ultimately can reference 70E and in essence make it law.
yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing, is if you think about 70E and why it even came to the table, it was because OSHA was trying to enforce the National Electrical Code, which didn't make sense, right? I mean, the any-season installation requirement. So they went to NFPA saying, "Hey, we need a document that talks about safe work practices and how we enforce it." So they have the shall, and 70E establishes the how, and then you have your electrical safety plan, which incorporates all of the different aspects of what you can, what you will, and what you won't do from an organization perspective. So, but
Mhm.
from an education perspective, I mean, David, you do a lot with commercial, right?
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
commercial business. So you think if you worked on a panel board and you've done residential wiring all your life, that you'd be qualified to work on a motor control center?
I would say not. right? Like,
Would you be
that
qualified
actually
to work on a residential panel board? Let's just start there.
well, I think this actually kind of goes back to what we were talking about before of the knowledge of not only the equipment but also safety. I think there is I said this the other day, a Venn diagram. I almost said Zen diagram again. Not the same type of diagram, but there is a Venn diagram of, you could know a little bit of the safety of the product and you can know the products. But the more you know about other products and the more you know about safety in general, goes to build the foundation of helping you be a more, let's say, qualified worker in general, right? In not only just for that particular product, but for the entirety of the electrical industry. So the more you know, full stop, right?
Yeah, and Roger Zieg, I apologize, Roger. He mentions 1910-399, which has the definition in this is OSHA now 1910. I'm looking for qualified person in there. OF. Qualified, yeah, qualified person, one who has received training in and has demonstrated skills and knowledge in the construction and operation of electric equipment and installations and the hazards involved. So, and they've got a couple notes to the qualified person. So OSHA 1910-399 is another great reference. Thanks, Roger, for bringing that up. So I don't know if you know this, Michael, but you can see some of the chats right over there. I don't know if you can see them. I know David's young and he's got good eyes. I'm like, doing one of these things. So, but in any case,
I'll let you continue guessing my age here, so it's okay. Yeah, no, those are great chats. Everything that's coming in that I can see, between, like you said, Roger and Chris, and I think a lot of the people on this call are really bringing up the fact that when we talk about the definition, there's not one definition. It's found in multiple places within OSHA, within 70E, within 70B. We haven't even talked about 70B yet.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I got the definition for that. There it is. Construction and operation. So they all have very similar traits. And if you look at this, I think 70E is the driver, each of these NFPA documents. Okay. Now, okay. So before this, I posted my little video this morning and said, hey, here's what we're going to be talking about. And boom, I got emails. Okay. And I got phone calls. One individual called me and said, hey, don't forget that jurisdictions, like different states, will have different, I guess you say, I don't know what you would call it, but rules and laws on who is considered qualified and who is not. So it might not be that, I could sit down and go through a bunch of training and say, look, I'm trained on it. And this was the example. I drive a car, right? Okay. And I can drive a vehicle and I drive a motorcycle. Now, I learned how to ride a motorcycle and I can ride my little motorcycle in the parking lot. I can know how to drive it in a city. I can drive it on the highway. And you could say, Tom, you are one of the best motorcycle riders that exist. Okay, I can do wheelies and all this other good stuff. But the state pulls me over and takes a look at my driver's license, and if it doesn't have an M on it, I'm not a qualified driver for that piece of equipment. So have you come across that, Michael, with regard to different states?
Yeah, I mean, so different states. California is one that comes to mind. When we talk about different codes, which I know you have access to here. If I give you 2 minutes, 30 seconds. They say qualified electrical worker who, by reason of a minimum of 2 years of training and experience, and who has demonstrated performance with the work to be performed and the hazards involved. So they actually call it a time span that's required to be qualified. And that's exactly right. I mean, when I get asked the question about can you have different requirements in different municipalities, I often actually go back to 70s, so the National Electric Code. Look at a map of just the US and the various states and ask, well, what national electric code are you actually working underneath by law? And I think, if I remember right, PA up until not too long ago was still back in the 1990s as their requirements, and they've caught up here, thankfully. But various states do require various revisions of these standards to be utilized as law, and California is one of those examples where they not only said that, but now they're adding their own little twist to the definition.
Yeah. And so now David does a lot of state adoption stuff, right? So Dave, when the National Electrical Code comes out, so we have a requirement, is it immediately enforceable in all states?
No, absolutely not. So the states, because we live in the United States of America, all of these states that we live in are 50 different experiments of government. And so NFPA 70 is simply just a reference book by which all of the states individually have their own building codes, state by state. And so each of those states have to go through whatever process that they decide whenever it comes to making some type of law. And all of those different 50 states have different ways of doing it. So sometimes my job is a little bit more complicated than I'd like it to be. However, that means they get to pay me more, or at least I can complain about it more. But however, essentially the way it goes about is that they cannot go ahead and base their law off of the book until it is published. But once it is published, oftentimes states will refer to the NFPA 70 book or NFPA 70B or whatever it is that they're particularly talking about. If they're talking about the electrical code, then they'll do NFPA 70. If they're talking about safety, then they might do B or E or whatever that particular application is. But they simply just use a trusted and industry standard as the boilerplate template and then work off of that, because there's no real reason to recreate the wheel. And one more point I did want to make is that with Oregon, who just as of, I guess, 2 days from now, are going to be going on the 2020 NEC for the state of Oregon. So they have actually went through in some of the places where you would normally see qualified persons in the code, they have changed it to persons having proper training and experience required to perform and evaluate the results on such as 230-95 performance training for GFPE or 240-67 or 87 for arc energy reduction for fuse holders or circuit breakers. And so, they essentially just completely struck out the qualified part and specifically said proper training and experience for this particular performance testing. Now, they didn't necessarily say, what that necessarily means, but I'm sure somewhere in the Oregon code, they go into a little bit more definition of exactly what that means.
Yeah. And you think about it, when we say qualified, when we just had a little bit of the discussion, I am qualified to drive my car. I'm not qualified to drive an 18-wheeler, right? And then even if I drove that 18-wheeler and I was the best truck driver out there, if I didn't have a license and they didn't test me and I didn't pass the test, then the state wouldn't recognize me. Now, when I was doing some research for this discussion, California, so I thought this was really interesting. California, for scaffolding, says that in addition to the persons meeting the requirements of qualified persons as defined in section 1504, persons possessing a certification of competence in scaffold erection, dismantling, and use issued by trade associations, etc., are considered. So they are looking, to your point, they're looking at specific applications saying, look, and I looked at their medium voltage and their low voltage requirements for the qualified person, and they don't talk about certifications, but for scaffolding they do. So it really begs the fact that you got to understand the state that you're working in, I mean, not like the state of intoxication, right? I mean, the state or the the jurisdiction you're working in, and what the laws are with regard to what they consider you to, how they consider you to be qualified.
Yeah, and Tom, I want to jump a little bit here because I
Yeah.
saw a great question come up about who can actually qualify an electrical worker. And we're talking about these municipalities, we're talking about states and different standards. I think it's a logical question. Who can actually qualify an individual? And it's in this case not the state. It's not federal government. It's not NFPA 70E, 70B, or NFPA in general. It ultimately comes down to your employer
Yeah.
has to qualify the employee.
Yeah.
So that's putting a lot of responsibility on the employers, the companies out there to have somebody working for them, right?
Right.
Potentially that understands how all this stuff fits together to be able to say, okay, here's what we need to do to meet these requirements to say this person's qualified to do their job.
Yeah, yeah. And in some cases, the state might tell you, here's some of the certifications, or here's what we would accept, right? And like we saw with scaffolding and things like that. So, or and then like what you're seeing in Oregon. So now, it was Oregon, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So they're looking at, you have to be trained, and what you're talking about is, was it 230.95 or was that 240.87? Do you remember?
There it was over multiple. So
Okay.
230.95, 240.67, and 240.87 all have the term qualified struck. And so now, just reading off of 240.87, the testing, 240.87C for performance testing, just
Right.
for everybody that's following along. The testing shall be conducted by persons having proper training and experience required to perform and evaluate the results such performance testing. And so they actually go through. What's funny is that also in this particular article is that they strike out a primary current injection just as a very specific example, and just say the arc energy reduction protection system shall be performance tested when first installed on site. And so what I'm more of, just the reason why I bring that up is that it really depends on the state you're living in. And my lovely girlfriend is training on being an attorney, and so I get to play one whenever I come on here, obviously. And so it really does depend on the state that you're in. And judging by, let's say, Oregon, for example, they're doing everything they can to take out of, qualified, they're taking out, and also they're taking out any type of example whenever it comes to performance testing, which largely they're shifting the subjectivity of the language onto the AHJ at that point,
Yeah.
right? By taking out any examples and leaving it completely up to the AHJ. And so now you have a situation where, let's say, if you're a contractor, it is now you're worried about which AHJ I have and their particular interpretation of the code. And so it's largely, now let's roll back now to California, where they, specifically listed the ways you can go about being qualified, right? And they listed the different examples of way you can be qualified. And there is, I'm gonna try to do this here. I am absolutely not a lawyer, but my understanding is that if you do list examples, then the assumption is that if you are not listing other examples, then they are assumed to be excluded.
Oh, wow.
So there's some stuff going on there that is completely up to your state. And if you are a little bit shaky on exactly about, what state you're working in, exactly what their theory about this kind of stuff is, ask.
Yeah, but
Because sometimes these aren't necessarily legal people doing this, right? But this is sometimes legalese type stuff. But if you have a question, it is always best to either go to your HJ, or if you are the HJ, right,
Yeah.
refer to the person that you need to be asking, because these particular questions, if you're asking them, I'm sure a lot of other people are as well.
Yeah, but in reality, you made the right statement, and I think, Michael, you said it too, that it's the owner who's going to be
Sure.
doing this training. And if you think about it, you're going to hire somebody. So now let's take 240.87 and 240.67. So you have zone selective interlocking, differential relaying, arc reduction maintenance switch, instantaneous. So Michael, have I'm sure you've done zone selective interlocking training and things like that. There are simple and complex. I mean, how do you, like, if you were going to train somebody on how to do ZSI, what do you typically do? Do you have like a modus operandi or a little like a syllabus?
I have a little cheat sheet is what I have, right? Behind the podium. No, generally we will start with what is zone selective interlocking, right? Because honestly, if you just instruct somebody on how to do the test with a specific tester, that may get you by 75% of the time, right?
Oh yeah.
But there are going to be those instances where, because you don't fully understand the system and how it's all connected and the inner workings of it, you may perform a test of it and then you find out, well, in the real world, it's not going to work. It worked in the test
Yeah.
with that test set, but that's it. So we like to go back to what is actually happening. Let's talk about ZSI from the standpoint of, we have a fault downstream of two breakers in series. Both breakers are going to see that fault
Yep.
current. The bottom breaker says, I'm going to trip, so I'm going to send a signal upstream to the breaker prior to it. That signal is actually like a wait your timing function signal, and the downstream breaker trips, versus if the upstream breaker doesn't see that signal, it says, I don't know if you got this or not. I'm going to trip immediately. I'm going to trip instantaneously, forget my time delay ultimately.
Right.
So we like to start there at those basic levels of understanding. And yes, draw on that board, right? And show the wiring and how these signals pass back and forth. And then ultimately, let's talk about the testers. And let's talk about how you're actually simulating the fault in both breakers at the same time and what those respective results are. Because I'd like to say, hey, it's always feeder to main breaker until you have a double-ended switchgear. Then it's feeder to tiebreaker to main breaker.
Right.
And you have some wiring that it's also at the same time feeder to main breaker still. So, we like to dive into those details, start at the fundamental level, and then work up to, here's actually how you perform all that testing.
Yeah.
And give the clear, complete picture ultimately.
So I had two phone calls today, this morning early. I had an email. I had a great discussion with Frank. But one of the discussion points, it's funny how a topic like this of the qualified person will generate discussion. There were some IEEE papers at the electrical safety workshop that talked about it. But one person who called me this morning was talking about the states, right? But he also brought up an important fact about what you just teed on, the fact of task based. You know, there's and we had this discussion where you sit down and say, okay, if I am task based trained, meaning let's say I'm on a production line and my job is to move product A to product B, and you train me how to move product A to product B all day, and I'm the best at it. I can move the most and the fastest and the most efficient, no errors. If I don't understand more about the system, when something goes wrong, I'm in trouble. Because to your point, you start at that base. You have to understand the fundamentals. And a lot of people, and I know I've been there, where I've sat down and thinking, why are you telling me that? Why are you trying to educate me on this, when how does it relate to my job? And then all of a sudden, as you go along, you go, oh, I get it now. Right. Because I call it the engineer in me, because I've always want to know why things and how things work. But I think just in general, if you want to be good at something, to be able to cover all your bases, you got to know the equipment, you got to know why it is what you're doing, the physics and everything else around it, to make sure that you know when you get in trouble, how to get yourself out of it.
Mhm. Absolutely. I'll give you a scenario. A few years ago, I was involved in a project at a hospital. I ended up being called down to that hospital, and ultimately, the problem that they had was their paralleling switchgear. Their emergency switchgear was nuisance tripping. And that's a really scary thing to have happen. Thankfully no problems came of it ultimately, but it's a scary problem that when they would run their generator test, they were having nuisance tripping. And there were some more technical, difficult reasons as to what was actually happening with some of the breakers in the switchgear lineup.
Mhm.
But ultimately, some of it was as simple as on the front of the switchgear, there was a little blue light that was on,
Oh, yeah.
which you wouldn't see normally because a parallel and switchgear is normally turned off on the emergency side, right? So when they would power the generator up, you'd see these blue lights come on, and that's the maintenance mode
Oh,
for the
yeah.
break, right? So all the breakers are now, instead of doing a instantaneous trip at 10 times full load, they're set at 2.5 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the inrush of your chillers and circuits that had larger transformers on it would actually cause those breakers to nuisance trip. And you think, well, what do I need to know about a switchgear? I need to know how to open and close breakers. That should be all I need to
Yeah.
know at best, right? Because it's there and it powers my building, and generally we're happy with that. But like you said, when that problem occurs, you don't know how to react. You don't know how to look and say, "Why are my blue lights on? Those shouldn't be on." That's
Right.
one of my issues.
Yeah, and you got to know the trip units. You have to know like zones. When I first started at Eaton back in '95, I think it was, I was on a help desk, and I would get phone calls where I would have a person who was testing a breaker, and they were doing primary current injection testing, and they wanted to verify the trip curves, and I would get this call. The first time I ever got the call, the guy says, "Hey, yeah, the moment I put current through this breaker, it trips." And he said, "I'm trying to verify this." And boy, I tell you what, I scratched my head and I was reading through the instruction manuals. And it wasn't until I think it was Jim Babcock who was on the calls with us. He comes walking over and I asked him, and he says, they probably don't have the jumper in for zone selective interlocking because it's looking for that signal and it's tripping instantaneously the moment you go above the short time delay pickup. And I'll tell you what, you would not believe the number of calls that I received on that one issue. And it really, I mean, you think about it, the guy is testing that breaker. He needs to understand that,
Hmm.
and if you're teaching that person the zone selective interlocking on that, then you really have to say, well, there's got to be a level of qualification and of the expertise on that individual who's working on that device because
Absolutely. I was just I was lucky enough late last year. I was actually on site giving training, and I had a customer that we walked onto their electrical room and they were showing me their one main breaker. They had multiple main feeds into the facility, and one of their main breakers, they told me every year when they do PM work, they find out that the breaker's trip unit doesn't work properly, and every year it's fried and they don't know why.
wow.
And I mean, I'm standing there scratching my head going, I know it's not an Eaton breaker, by the way, but I know that it's impossible to have this fail every single year, year after year. So I was talking to the individual and I said, well, what PM work are you performing? And they're doing an insulation test on the breaker, right? And they're applying 1,000 volts
Oh
to
yeah.
this low voltage breaker. And what does that trip unit have? It has a VT circuit in it, right? Because it can measure voltage, and they're not removing the plug for the VT circuit. And they're hitting that trip unit with 1,000 volts every year doing the test. Trip unit fails every single year. They replace it,
Wow.
right? Everything's good for the next year. The next year it happens again. Well, that customer of mine called me up just the other day and said, Mike, we are so thankful for you. We know you weren't here to give us that insight, but we had that firm back and they didn't remove the plug. We stopped them. And this was the first year we didn't have to replace a trip unit.
Well, you know what? There's some manufacturer out there who's watching their sales go down because you're teaching people. Jeez.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, but that's the thing, right? I mean, we're talking from a safety perspective. It's also a cost
Oh
perspective
yeah.
too, right? Is we can have employees that are better qualified, better trained, better skill sets. It improves ultimately the whole entire culture that we have.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I'm not a good drywaller. Okay. I'm not good at spackle. I can put drywall on the wall, Well, my wife and I took in the bathroom. We had the wall off, so I put the board up, and it was one of these where the dimensions were a little different. I used a 5-gallon bucket of spackle on a wall that was maybe 4 foot long. Okay, so and I was just not qualified to spackle. So when you get a trained person on the job, you're going to save money just from a materials perspective, right? Now, Roger Zieg says that the qualified person definition was the same for the NEC and 70E until the 2015 version of 70E. And they had a division between installing and working on electrical began to make a difference in training for the qualified person. Is the person installing or working on it after installation? That's a good question. After installation, are you installing or are you working on it? It depends on what you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I think if you're, renovating, you're installing new components, right? Upgrading,
Yep.
you could maybe argue that that's installation.
Sure.
Um, but there's a lot of other work that falls under the normal operation and
Maintenance.
ultimately preventive maintenance.
That's
Yep.
right. Yeah. It's a 70B thing, right, David?
Absolutely. Now I was about to say we don't even want to touch reconditioning, right?
You know what? I knew you were going to go there. I knew you were going to go there.
You saw the smile on my face. I was like, here's my opening. Here it is. I'm going to talk about reconditioning.
Yes. I mean, but that is another aspect. I mean, you have so let's just talk for just qualified person. We talked a little bit about it already. We talked about the example of the truck driver versus a car, right? We talked about the legal aspect of whether the state recognizes you. You brought up the fact that you need to be trained on 24087 and 24067 on those technologies. So I'm sure that you would have to have something to show you had training on zone selective interlocking, right? When you start talking about things different activities, 70B maintenance, I could be trained to install a panel board, okay, and do that very well, but not be trained on how to recondition something, right? I mean, there has to be levels of curriculum and education that you're going to train this installer one way. You're going to train a maintainer. He probably has to understand how it's installed, but he probably has to have, or she has to have a little bit more depth with regard to the components that they're working on, right? I would think. I mean, in your training, Michael, do you differentiate that? Do you just, how do you handle that? I mean, is there any, do you change how you teach somebody based upon the type of work they're going to do?
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that makes in-person training actually easier than what we're doing right now, right?
Yeah.
Because while we can see each other and we can see our faces, right? Some of the body language we don't see, right? The way you're sitting in the chair, the way you lean back to the side, maybe, right? Tom, you're moving around a lot. David, he's kind of more still, Yeah, he needs to, shake his back a little bit, make sure you don't get too stiff.
I'm a professional. That's the difference.
But ultimately, as an instructor, as a trainer, you need to take that into consideration what the audience is, right? How they're reacting to the training, but also what are their skill sets coming in. So if I walk into a room to train engineers, I'm going to have a completely different presentation style than if I'm with a group of electricians. Not saying one's better or not. It's not a fact of that. It's different work.
Yep.
They understand things differently. When we talk about voltage detectors with the engineers, I'm probably going to say the exact name of the voltage detector because they're very detail oriented people, right?
Right.
Versus I'm going to start to use trade names and slang a little bit more with the electricians because that's what they understand. Ultimately going back to the technology a little bit, not even just the individuals, but depending on what the topic is, we're going to have different presentation styles. We're also going to have different presenters. I'm lucky. I have presenters all across the country that can train on different topics. Now, does that mean you're always going to get the local trainer? No, absolutely not. If you're in Portland, Oregon, as a example, my SF6 breaker expert,
Hmm.
he's in Maryland, right?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to get you the best person to be able
Right.
to talk about that topic ultimately, and that's where standardized training is great. It has a lot of benefits to it, right? But ultimately, that customized training, there is a huge benefit to that because now we can really dig into the details and hit your system. I get requests all the time for Magnum DS switchgear, right? And that's a common switchgear at Eaton manufacturers. Mike, I want operation and maintenance training of a Magnum DS switchgear. And my canned response back is, can you provide me a bill of materials for it or pictures? Because not every Magnum DS switchgear is built the same. It has different relays, different trip units, different breakers, different hoist on it, etc. Right? So there's not a cookie cutter training for Magnum DS switchgear as an example.
And you might run into a project or a customer site where they have multiple manufacturers. So one lineup of switch gears from one manufacturer is going to be different from another manufacturer because they have different capabilities, different tricks of how they do their engineer their systems up.
Absolutely. And then when you start talking, controls, main time main schemes, etc. We now throw in PLCs in and human machine interfaces and all that
Oh
in
yeah.
remote operation. I mean, it is a very, very custom product. I remember years ago, I was actually at our Sumter facility, and I had never been there before, and I kind of expected like, okay, it's like Ford and how they build the cars, right? They go down the assembly line. And I walked in, I'm like, well, where's the assembly line? They're like, well, every switchboard's custom in essence, right? So yeah, great
Yeah.
picture of one, right?
Yeah.
I guarantee you there's nobody else in the world that has a switchboard that looks like that.
Yeah. But I mean, what I love about this picture is it shows you have an HMI interface to your point, which has software, right? And it's controlling stuff. And there's going to be a wiring diagram. You have a isolation transfer switch, okay, in this lineup. You've got multiple displays that do different things. Some of it could be just giving you energy data, but some of it could be actually controlling equipment, right?
Absolutely. That HMI on the top left with the big Eaton logo on it, that screen doesn't even control anything that's in that switchboard.
Oh,
That screen actually controls load banks that are about 30 feet away and up one story,
yeah.
right? But the controls are wired down to this level because of the facility it's in. So a switchboard is just not a switchboard.
Yeah. And you know what? So the other aspect of this is there's there could be a UPS in there giving control power to some maybe a relay or whatnot. And you think you've established an electrically safe working condition, right? But you
Mhm.
find out later that hey, I still got 120 volts in there.
Absolutely. And that switchboard there, there's actually a transformer mounted in the bottom of it. So in the
Oh
second section
yeah.
from the right, that's a transformer. So there's 480 volts and 208 120 all in the same switchboard. I, I I used to think, hey, things are pretty simplistic, right? Years ago we made things that had one use. As we progress through time here, we're integrating our systems more and more into the equipment, right? So the equipment is getting more and more complex, more automated. It has more metering capabilities so that we can control our energy use and we can control power factor and we can look for harmonics and all those fun things, right? All being built into this equipment. And now we find out that to work on this one piece of equipment, you don't need just one skill set. You need like 500 skill sets.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, I look at some of this stuff and I think, man, it is, to your point, it's very custom. So if I was an owner of a facility, I was I don't know, a major corporation, petrochem or an automotive or whatever it is, I'd probably want to customize. I'd probably want to get like a guy like you to come in and tell me here, look at all my equipment and then say, okay, here's what I would recommend. I mean, do we do that? Is that something you would do, that you would go out and figure out what training that company would need based upon what they have installed?
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes it's a simple exchange of emails back and forth, maybe some conference calls, right? Looking at pictures, looking
Right.
at bill of materials. Sometimes it's we send a member of the sales force, or we send one of our field service representatives or one of our power system engineers that is close to kind of get that first data gathering done as to what does a facility have. But ultimately a lot of times it's just a lot of time looking through drawings, looking through pictures, looking through manuals,
Yeah.
figuring out what are all the options that exist inside this piece of equipment, and then it's customizing. So a lot of times what you see in the actual presentation, so let's say it's a 1 day training on site, you look at that 1 day and you go, okay, so you're here 8 hours. Okay, I'm glad you were here, this was great, you did a great job. I guess you do 5 of these a week. Well,
Yeah.
no, not really, right? We spend 4 days prepping for the 1 day on site.
That's true. That is true. Very true. And Ryan Jackson points out that the first step of creating an electrically safe work condition is determining all the sources of voltage. And when you look at a lineup like this, I mean, to your point, that display goes somewhere else. Now, I know in this building we have photovoltaic, we have PV. I doubt it comes into this lineup, but you've got PV generators. Wind. I know we just put a one of those wind turbines outside. So it is getting more complicated. And then procedures, right? I mean, you have to figure out not only what is on site, but I might tell you, hey, in my facility, I operate that equipment with that double-ended switchgear with my tiebreaker closed, or I operated open, and when this happens, I know that tiebreaker is going to close, so I might have operating procedures that you got to think about too.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. Operating procedures while you're doing the work, and I know you're the 70B guy on this call, right? Okay, Tom,
We just
you're
had our
gonna love
committee
this.
meeting today.
I know. I heard a little bit of it. 70B, I'm going to throw this one at you because this is going to be great here. So we talked about this electrically safe work condition, and we need to identify all the voltage sources, right?
Hmm.
So maybe it's your facility, you do your own maintenance, or maybe you brought in a team of experts to do the maintenance for you, right? What do? They bring out all these boxes, call them test sets,
Oh yeah.
and they're going to sometimes inject current, right? Could be secondary current, could be primary current, could just maybe be doing some functional testing. So now we got some 120-volt power we're bringing back onto the equipment in different locations.
Yep.
And then we're going to use insulation test sets, withstand test sets, where we're talking 1,000 volts, maybe 10, 20,000 volts that you're going to bring there. Did we prepare for that? Is
Yeah.
that qualified person, you know, recognizing those hazards? Oh, perfect.
There you
Right on
go.
cue.
And we got both in here. We've got the purple. I call it the Phoenix. Okay, and usually there's like
Wait,
music
hold on a
that
second.
goes with
It's not that you call it the Phoenix. It's what it's called. It's, yes, Tom calls it the Phoenix. So does everybody else, because that's what it's called.
And
It's
you know
called
what
the
gives it away? You know what gives it away, David?
Because it
It's
has Phoenix on the front of it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And but I call it the Phoenix, right? The other one that he has there is another test bed. That's for secondary current injection test. What is that one, Mike? Do you know?
Yep. That's secondary injection testing, and it looks like maybe potentially he has a plug into the auxiliary power supply on the breaker also, it looks like. Not necessarily required for a lot of the injection test sets, but
Mhm.
something that you sometimes do, perform so that you can, verify the actual lights and the indications other than the mechanical indications that you may receive from that breaker.
Right. And now the difference is, and I know there's another one which I don't call the Phoenix. It's a gray box. It's a different box, and it's a mid-sized one. But I think the differences between these is the amount of a fault current, available fault current that it can supply. Right. Because in
Right.
these cases, we're testing the instantaneous, we're testing short time delay, we're testing ground fault, GFPE, and things like that. But if you sat me down with that little gray box, I'd probably kill myself. Okay, because I don't know a doggone thing about it, and everything that he's doing there. I mean, it looks complicated because sometimes it is complicated, and you've got to know what you're doing with the equipment before you get involved with it. It's not something I'm going to pick up a manual and say, okay, I know we make some really good manuals. Okay, we've got pictures. We even show you how to plug the box in, but that doesn't qualify me to use it.
Right, right. I mean, you look at the Phoenix. I'm gonna refer to it as the Phoenix all the time with quotes. That test set's capable of putting out thousands of amps, potentially tens of thousands,
Yeah,
over 10,000 amps. A secondary injection tester like the gray box on the floor that he's using right now, maybe puts out 30 or so amps, maybe 45 amps tops. Both instances, those are going to be lower voltages, 4, 5, 6 volts. They're very low voltage, but a current source. Compare that to functional testing, which some of those testers sit on a bench, but other ones are handheld nowadays.
yeah.
And then the new stuff out there, Tom, there are actual self-testing breakers now. You just plug your computer into
Oh yeah,
and a little software and good to go. So even something as simple sounding as I just want to know how to test this trip unit. There's not one answer to that question. There's actually multiple answers to how you would do it.
yeah. That's a good point. And we did this David, and I think David, you set this up right where we were trying to show how testing is done on these circuit breakers for 24087, 24060. Well, 24067 is fuses, but 24087, and then 23095, section 23095 for ground fault protection of equipment. But as I look, especially when you start getting into test equipment, it gets. I mean, there it is. There it is. There it is. You ready? Phoenix. That's why I call
wish
it.
that we had
Phoenix.
like photoshopped you actually doing this rather than the actual logo on it. It's just a picture of Tom B. But
Yep.
yeah, I remember that day. That was a cool day, to be absolutely honest, because
It's
I
short.
was
Yeah.
writing a white paper that is currently available on Eaton.com. But it's hard to write a white paper whenever you don't know too much about it. So we documented the heck out of it, and I want to thank everyone that was at the PSEC that allowed us to kind of throw a camera in front of their face and
Oh, absolutely.
let us kind of do the material and gather the content to be able to do it something like this, right? To be able to
Yep.
show everyone that's viewing right here, right now. Congratulations, you just saw what primary and secondary current testing looks like for free. How about that?
Yeah.
Just sitting at your computer.
Act
So
now.
that's right. But yeah, and so one thing I do kind of want to like mention whenever it comes to primary and secondary current injection testing is that particularly for Eaton stuff, it is always important to look at what 24067 87 says. And whenever it comes to Eaton products, as far as all of them that I'm aware of, we almost always, the code pretty much says follow what the manufacturer requests to do, or follow the manufacturer's instruction of exactly how to go about the performance testing. And we have primary current injection testing, but there is not an application that I'm aware of. There might be a couple, but I would say for the majority of them, we do prefer, or at least recommend, secondary current injection testing, just because of the cumbersome amount of force of not only going and taking that Phoenix somewhere, but also the necessary source of voltage that you would need to be able to perform that primary current injection testing, compared to the secondary current injection testing, which was essentially, a suitcase or a laptop, right? Like, I understand you just said that all you would necessarily need is a laptop for some of these particular testings, but I would argue that there isn't too much of a difference between what we're already doing now with secondary current injection testing and using a laptop.
Well, no, go ahead, Michael.
I would just say absolutely. There's really not that much of difference, other than potentially the test set itself, right?
Sure.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
Computer, maybe software. I can connect all my breakers to do the secondary injection. I might need multiple test sets to do the secondary injection. But I also want to bring up here real quick. I got the codes and standards die here, David. Right? We didn't even talk about IEEE. Right. I mean, this is diving into C37, C57, and all those IEEE standards that also support everything we're talking about here.
Yeah, you're right.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question, Tom, very quickly. And I know, this is that might be the fork in the road here, right? Because we're at 63 minutes right now. And so normally we promise people this is normally about an hour. So just to let everyone behind the curtain, we had a pre-meeting before this. Crazy. This is with preparation. So just imagine what it would be like without.
Well, but hold on.
I was saying is that, do we want to continue and go on down the road of IEEE, or do we want to do a part 2 next Tuesday? That is, I'm putting it out to the committee and maybe even some of the members on the chat here. Do you want to come back next week, or do we want to continue this conversation? Because we can dive into it.
Does Michael have something lined up next week already?
I actually do. I am traveling to the lovely state of Missouri. Where you're right, where I'm going to be spending a week at one of our customer sites, talking actually about low voltage switchgear and motor control centers.
Oh, sweet. But we can always pick
training.
We can always pick up. We don't have to pick it up next week. We can pick it up. We can have a part 2 later on, a discussion, and do some filler for next week. We got Thursday this week too. I have my afternoon session. But we can definitely continue this discussion at a different date. But I do want to say, primary versus secondary. GFPE requires primary current injection testing. Now, per the National Electrical Code. But my opinion is, you don't need to bring Phoenix. Okay, I gotta have one of those buttons that says the Phoenix.
I'm gonna laugh at this every time.
You don't need, I need the button. You don't need to bring the Phoenix for a lot of that. You don't need that much current in reality to test the CTs, to test sensors and things like that from a testing perspective. And I think all of those different components are important to understand how they all play with each other, because reverse polarity on CTs, making sure that all that stuff is in there correctly. Sometimes primary current injection testing is the only way to do it.
Right. Absolutely. I was just thinking, Tom, ground fault protection, low voltage, what's the maximum setting on breakers? 1200 amps?
Yeah.
But that's maximum.
That's the maximum. So I can bring it down a lot lower too. I mean, I don't have to inject 2000 amps through that breaker. I could bring it down to its lowest setting and just inject that current to make sure that everything's functioning correctly. So
absolutely.
Last part of this, we said, because we can get into IEEE and then the next session, but we said, what's the recipe for success? So Michael, why don't you help us understand? And I know you sent me this, and I know we have a website, which I have linked in our description.
Yeah, I think the recipe for success is sadly enough not necessarily going to be found in a cookbook, right? Because of all the things we're talking about right now, depending on who you are, what tasks your employees perform, what type of facility you're in, what state you're in,
Yeah.
or municipality, right? That recipe is going to change. It's more like my grandmother going into the kitchen, and she's got the beef, right? And then she's just going to open up the drawer and find out what seasoning she has, right? And make something that turns out amazing every time. But that's what we really need to do, is we need to focus on what are the needs, what jobs do employees actually perform, and then build a safe work program and build a training program around that. And this slide I just sent you, this is actually taken right directly off of our webpage, and you can see how you can mix and match a little bit. You can have that traditional in-person instruction for sure, but you can also accomplish some remote instruction. There are some topics that we can do over the internet just like this, and still get the same expertise out of it, right? And then e-learning. Sometimes e-learning could actually be more valuable to an individual versus actually having a live instructor, because we are going to be able to go back and watch this on YouTube, right? And hit rewind and rewind and rewind and see that
Yeah.
phoenix multiple times, right? If we were in person, we're limited, right? So when we talk about training programs and what's the training program look like for a specific person or a specific company, it needs to probably most likely have some in-person instruction. But it could also have e-learning, could have remote instruction, could have some simulation. Here we have virtual simulation, but it could also be simulation with demos, right? And we need to look at that training program and really discuss what are the safety aspects you need. So are you exposed to shock hazards, arc flash hazards? Do you perform grounding, right? All the safety stuff, but then also all the fundamentals, the reading of drawings,
Yeah.
understanding Ohm's law, power, triangle, etc. And then pair that with the actual equipment. And how do you actually operate and maintain that equipment? So, I don't think there's one recipe for it. I think it varies depending on who you are, what industry you're in. But that's what people like me are here to do, right? And ultimately, Tom and David, we all talk to different people and say, what do you need? How can Eaton, how can just us personally help you out to improve the safety? Because ultimately, I mean, this is our job, don't get us wrong, but I think all three of us really just enjoy helping people, and that's why we're here. And I hopefully my manager doesn't catch wind of this video clip, but would I still be here if he didn't pay me today? Absolutely, because I think this is important.
Absolutely, yeah. And Johnny Gonzalez points out a good point that 70E doesn't talk about online training. In fact, 70E talks about hands-on training, etc. Right? So, but in where my head's at, on an online type of discussion is a layer of the onion. It's always nice to have some sort of, if you did something with a customer, like say you were going to go, like you're going to go down to St. Louis, right? Or Missouri, wherever. And you were going to go down there. If you did a pre-session with them to say, look, we're going to talk about some of this classroom exercise stuff. And then when you get there in person and you give them homework and you say, okay, here was your homework was this. And we talked about this. Now we're going to sit down where the rubber meets the road, and you're going to be able to engage with the equipment based on what you learned that you would have done in a classroom anyway. So, and you know what, Johnny, I would say it could be considered classroom training, because what's the difference if you're, yeah, I can stand up in front of a room and talk to you, but I could do pretty good instruction over the web.
I'll tell you right now, most classrooms in America are mostly remote anyway. So yes, this is the definition of classroom training right now, right?
That's right. Classes in service. Go ahead, Michael.
That's right.
I was just saying, and I don't mean to diminish anything that the NFPA 70E committee has been doing, right? But when you look at the standards, when you look at OSHA, what came first? The hazard, the incidence, or the standard? My understanding is arc flash existed long before NFPA 70E ever identified it as a hazard, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So who's to say, in our world, and I've done this exercise, we've become very familiar with e-learning very recently, right? In the past year. If you search for e-learning 2 years ago, you'd find it. It existed. It was out there. But a lot of it was HR functions, general housekeeping, right? Right? That kind of stuff. You would not find e-learning for what we're talking about in our industry. It didn't exist 2 years ago. Now you Google e-learning electrical, and there are starting to be many web pages that are starting to pop up. Many companies are offering solutions in an e-learning format that just didn't offer them before. So I would say I think times are changing a little bit here, and my guess is in the next revision of 70E, you could very easily see e-learning as an option and specifically called out.
Yeah, and I can also speak to that very quickly. During the several meetings that I go, across the country, one of the items that's almost brought up at every state's meeting, or at least like since March of last year, was, making sure that one of the accepted education methods was e-learning or remote learning or something like that whenever it comes to continuing education hours for any type of licensure whenever it came to a state. So every board of electricians from Portland, Oregon to Portland, Maine, another mention for Oregon today, but every single one of those states for the most part did not accept any type of remote learning or e-learning before March of 2020, and nearly all of them have either made some type of temporary provision to allow that for education for that state, or they have accepted it permanently going forward. And so just to make your point, the world has changed. In case anyone was not aware already, the world has changed since last year.
And that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, David. Here in the services group, right, that I report up through, ultimately, we required an annual demonstration of these safety skills where we had individuals put PPE on, de-energize the system, apply grounds, verify the absence folders, right? All the steps we're talking about, verify that electrically safe work condition. We used to do that in person. COVID hit. What do? Do we just stop?
Yeah.
Well, no, we kind of pivoted, and we have some trailers that we use for training that have whole distribution systems in them. Now we don't energize all the equipment because of safety concerns with only having one person in that trailer at a time. But we've actually wired up cameras, and ultimately the person administering that demonstration is sitting halfway across the U.S. watching multiple cameras on their screen, and is it just the same as being there in person? No, it leaves a little to be desired, right? Sometimes we have to say, hey, can you step to the left a little bit so I can see what you did in front of you? But ultimately, that I think is a better solution rather than saying, you know what, we're just going to skip the next year or two and not actually have you do those demonstrations. And we still do find employees that, have PPE that maybe expired last week. And this is our opportunity to fix it. So there's a positive in, I don't want to say taking the 90% approach, but, let's take the 90% approach and we'll get the other 10% later on and be more efficient.
Now, I just want to mention something very quickly, Tom, and I apologize, is that we started this entire conversation talking about how you cannot replace in-person training because there's nothing like being in front of the product, right? And now we just spent the past 5 to 10 minutes talking about how e-learning, is starting to take over. And so I don't think we're necessarily speaking out of both sides of our mouths here. I think there is a distinct point of you can get very, very far whenever it comes to e-learning or e-classroom or remote learning, however you want to put it. I don't think there is any situation where you're going to be able to replace actually having a product in your hand and seeing it for yourself in person. But I'm positive there are some particular concepts whenever it comes to learning that you don't necessarily have to be there, but to get that 100% mastery of it, I think sometimes it is required to be there. We're not necessarily saying replace the entirety of the curriculum with e-learning. I think we're saying there's a way to supplement both and be able to lean on both depending on what your situation is. I think that might be what we're trying to say. Does that sound
discussion
accurate?
though? the same discussion occurred at 70E. And I remember sitting around, because I'm not on 70E, but I go to every meeting, right? And I can remember listening to them talk this exact same discussion. And now I found it. And Ryan, thank you. He pointed out 110.6 for those out there, 110.6A4 talks about type of training, and they added an informational note. So the type of training says the training required by 110.6A shall be classroom, on the job, or a combination of the two. The type and extent of training provided shall be determined by the risk to the employee, and they added an informational note. Classroom training can include interactive electronic or interactive web-based training components. So exactly what we're talking about right now, understanding there are some things you can do and there are some things you can't do over the web. So and if you strategically do it right, you can use it to your advantage to say, I'm going to get my student prepped and ready so that when we go down, you're effectively using their time. They could be at home watching and studying and going over all of these higher theory. To your point, Michael, you're talking about the the power triangle and all this other good stuff, and we could talk about the Phoenix operating conditions and what it is and all that good stuff. But then when you get on site, you can do a short in-person refresher and then say, okay, we're going to go over and we're actually going to get on the equipment and we're going to work on hands-on. So could be a very efficient use of time. I like it.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, the best relationships I have with some of my best customers right now, that's exactly what they're doing. They're looking at their overall safety program, what training they need to accomplish, and how can we utilize e-learning versus demonstration with demos versus the real thing, and accomplish those goals in a efficient and effective manner.
Sure.
Yeah, and there's
and I was gonna say, we didn't even throw another wrench in here: generational gaps and how people learn in different venues.
What are you trying to say?
You got a generation right here.
What do you mean?
I'm saying that I'm not as good at e-learning as Tom is. That's what I'm saying, David.
Hey, I'm the old fart in the room here. Come on.
That was the joke.
Oh, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and that includes me, right?
I got
that. Michael, you have this Eaton.com electrical worker training, and that's a good way to get a guy like you, or like you said, we have people all across the country. It's not like, we may have to bring a professional who knows, like you said, gas insulated switchgear or whatnot. But if somebody wanted to even investigate what would be the training that you would need for different projects, they could start at Eaton.com/electrical worker training, right?
Absolutely. And then on that page, there's a lot of request specific training, request more information. We've worded it lots of different ways. Currently, it's found in a blue bar. You're probably going to make me a liar on this page. Right there. Yep. Contact a training expert, right? You can fill that form out. That goes to the email that was also up on your screen behind this. And this is just a starting point to say, who are you? How can we contact you? And what are your initial thoughts on training from a class perspective and topic perspective, but also what formats are you looking for? Are you an in-person training person? Do you want some of that e-learning? And I would also say there's that how did you hear about Eaton's training right there, and says please select. If you choose other and write in there Eaton Tech Talk, Tom will know that you got it from here.
That's what you do. That's exactly right.
That's what you do.
You gotta select other, and you gotta put in Eaton Tech Talk. And I don't care if it's all one word or three different words, or if you want to be correct and not get marketing mad at me, you just put Eaton Tech Talk.
Yeah, use
Or-
promo code Tom whenever you put in your order. Just make
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I'll get absolutely zip of anything out of that comes out of that. But Felix, Michael, when COVID hit, after you and I were together at the electrical safety workshop, that was my last trip. Okay. After that, I sat there trying to figure out how do I, because we want to share information, and I would do a lot of teaching across the country. So I went online, and Felix was there from the get-go, and we came up with the name TSDN, the Technical Social Distancing Network. Tell me that won't grow on you.
That may grow on me for sure. Hey, I got another surprise here, Tom. If you expand this out and go back in the web page, I want to point something out, if you don't mind, or
No.
just click on remote instruction, the learn more and browse courses. So on this page are all of our open enrollment courses that we're currently running. If you scroll down right there, above the 40 caliber suit. So we have drawings, we have overvoltage protection, overcurrent protection, electrical flash safety, transformers, right? Some really good classes here. If you click on those and you take our paid courses, all you need to do is enter the promo code Eaton Tech Talk, one word, and that gets you a 10% discount off of our list pricing.
Sweet! Eaton Tech
Just
Talk.
for you, Tom.
You are the man. 10%
Wow.
off of training. That is absolutely awesome.
Yep,
Wait.
I spent all day, Tom, on the phone fighting for this, man.
Is that right?
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. This was a no-brainer. We love what you're doing here, Tom. I just want to say on behalf of the training department, thank you for putting this stuff together. We love it, and we know there's a lot of great people that log onto these all the time. So 10% discount off of all these list price, not a problem.
Awesome. So all they got to do is put the discount code. So you just you would select the date, and then there's a promotional code up at the top, right, or somewhere up in here. Once you go to tickets, right there, promo code.
Yep, absolutely. Eaton Tech Talk, one word.
Eaton Tech Talk, and then you hit
can't
apply. And look at that discount.
How about that? And
Love it.
everybody, just to let you know, that discount is coming directly from Tom Dimitriev's check. And so we can get enough. He'll actually owe the company by the time the 2 weeks are up.
We're having troubles. Everybody's disappearing. Wait a second. Oh, wait, I can't hear you. I'm going through a tunnel. Oh, man. No wonder why. Bobby Joe's up there. She's running around. She's like, our bank account's empty. Gosh, beautiful. Well, that's cool. So 10% off. I want to make sure everybody knows that. So I can put that in my description, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
And there's no end date on that for right now. So
for right now,
take that what it means.
I love it. Well, that's good stuff. I really appreciate that. That's really cool, and I know everybody's gonna love that too. So we got Johnny Gonzalez talking about 3 generations. We got Felix Sandoval, and you'll be the first one. If Felix orders on-site training, you're going to Columbia. Or no, we'll both go. And it'll be us two and Felix. Oh, you'll go too. Okay.
Yeah. Buenos dias. Let's do it.
I thought we were taking this show on the road, honestly, all 3 of us. I mean,
excellent. That's sweet.
Just dinner's on you, Tom.
So I just want to make sure it has to be all one word. Is that right? Is that correct?
One word.
Okay. All one word. So
perfect.
So all one word. Eaton Tech Talk, and get 10% off.
Absolutely.
Training. Excellent. Love it. And that is at
electrical worker training.
It's been scrolling across the bottom this entire time. It's been for like an hour and a half.
It's right there. The Phoenix. It's beautiful. Well, this is good stuff, Michael. I appreciate, and I hopefully everybody else. I know we went over an hour and a half, and this is becoming an hour and a half program. I mean, the guys on TV, they do it all in an hour, but we take an hour and a half, but that's okay. It's good. Any closing words? We'll start with you, Mr. David.
First, I want to say thank you very much, Mike, for coming on. This is the first time we really interacted, and so I was really looking forward to it whenever we did the prep meetings for this, because me still being a little bit early in the career for this particular electrical industry, it's always good to have some type of expert to go to about particular areas. And so this is one of those things that kind of helped me out, because the reason why I wanted to get started doing these streams was to expose myself in the good way to different topics whenever it comes to the electrical industry. And so I really do appreciate you coming on here and supporting it. And if you ever have any other topic that you ever want to go over, or if you want to chime in whenever it comes to the chat, if you're not necessarily on, please, you're more than welcome. Now officially a friend of the show. And thanks very much. I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Michael.
I was just say, I just want to say thank you, David. I mean, I've had a blast here. Thank you to you. Thank you, Tom, for reaching out to me and asking me to do this. It's been fun here. I look forward to a few more calls and meetings with you, because I'm looking at our list of what we were supposed to cover today, and I think we just threw that paper out the door, right?
What happened?
We still have half of it to cover, but no, I love it. I think these are great. I think the format is awesome, that we can sit down together, we can talk amongst us, right? But also have everybody's input in the chat function, right? And Tom, you've been calling out on people. I've seen a few people that I've referenced as we were going along here. I think this is great that, we really can get together, and, nobody's forcing any of us to be here and do this. We all do it because we have a passion for
Absolutely.
it. So
I'm being held against my will, but that's not good more than that.
Well, we were going to keep that a secret,
Oh, I'm sorry.
But,
that's between me, you guys, and everyone watching.
No, it's really been great, and I will come back anytime you guys want to have me.
Sure.
Not a problem.
We have
I'm
to
here
finish
for
our
it.
discussion. We have to finish this discussion and
That's
get
right.
into some of the IEEE stuff. So that'd be perfect.
Absolutely.
And if anybody has questions, send them to me. I'll put my email, Thomas A. Dimitrovich at Eaton.com, or David A. Smith
Nailed it. Good work.
at Eaton.com. And then Michael,
you don't remember? Oh, Tom, I'm going to tell you how to remember this.
is it
Forever. It's B as in best.
okay? Oh my God.
Michael B. King at Eaton.com. You got it.
Perfect. So if there's anything else you want to hear about, we're going to have, you'll definitely be coming back on again. I'd love to continue this discussion, because there's a lot to talk about on the qualified individual. And there's other topics too that we can talk about from a training perspective. I mean, what's really cool about you, Michael, is you are, like you're saying, you're going out to the job site, you're going out to see customers, you're working on equipment, not just Eaton equipment either. You're doing other manufacturers. That's one thing I know our services division prides himself on, that we can work on anybody's equipment. So that's an important aspect. It's not just an Eaton solution that you're looking at. So thank you for joining us today. And thank you, David, again for wearing a tie.
Always. Just for you. I dressed up for Michael today. I had nothing to do with you, Tom.
You're the man.
I appreciate it. I went a little casual.
Awesome. And thank you, Johnny Gonzalez, and everybody else out there. I appreciate you dialing in. And this is going to be on the YouTube site, on my LinkedIn site, and my Facebook site. So it'll be out there. No edits, buddy. This is live. This is the way it goes. This is raw. So.
And also, just a reminder, I believe if you go on LinkedIn or YouTube or anything like that, if you click that hashtag Eaton Tech Talk, you can not only find this episode, but you can find all the previous episodes that we've recorded. And I think they're great, personally. I'm in most of them, but, just saying.
Yeah, and two, we have a podcast.
We do.
So this is going to be available on the podcast, so people can listen to it. And I've already had some phone calls of people listening to it, asking me questions. So They're watching. They're listening to it. So that's a good thing.
What's the title of the podcast, very quickly, Tom?
The title of it's Eaton Tech Talk.
Perfect. And so
Yeah.
if anyone is not already aware of exactly how to go about doing this podcast thing, I'm new to it as well. If you have an iPhone, let's for example, you just go onto the podcast app and you type in Eaton Tech Talk. It'll come up. If you have an Android or any other type of phone, you can go and download some type of podcast app. It's roughly pretty easy, to be absolutely honest, once you get the hang of it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. All right, everybody.
Absolutely.
And thank you guys. We're going to shut this program down. All right.
That's it.
All
Awesome.
right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
You hold on, hang on. I'm going to close the feed and everything, and then we'll come back on. All right. Oh, wait a second. No, I'll do that. Hold on. I got to go to studio mode, and this is what we do. So we go to our ending, and then we.
There it is.
Well, I got that. I got the thank you, but I got my contact information. So, all right, everybody, take care. Stay safe. Thanks for all you do for the electrical industry. Thanks for what you do for electrical safety. Stay safe, and please stay healthy. Right. There we go. I faded out.